Hello, I'm Tim Smith with the Adams County Historical Society, and welcome to another Monuments Monday. And as you may have noticed, it's raining today, but we bring you these videos every Monday regardless of weather. And of course, today we're going to do another episode of Monuments, Markers, and Tablets in the town of Gettysburg. And this is number 39. The monument to Company K, 1st Pennsylvania Reserves in the square of Gettysburg. This monument was dedicated on June 29, 1991. The dedication of this monument was a culmination of several years of research by the Adams County Company K Memorial Committee. It was Colonel Jacob Sheaves, local historian, school teacher, NPS park ranger, and tour guide, who was the major proponent for the erection of the monument. And along with his nephew, Dr. William Ridinger, who was also a longtime licensed battlefield guide, they formed the backbone of the Company K Committee. But on the back of the monument are the names of all the people associated with this committee. The monument is 8 foot 6 inches tall and 11 foot 6 inches in length, and it's made of blue-gray Vermont granite. It was designed by James Kadori of Kadori Memorials, and it cost some $30,000. The monument features the names of 105 individuals that were members of Company K, including 17 who died in service. And there's a list of the battles they were involved in also on the monument. So Company K, 1st Pennsylvania Reserves, was organized in September of 1861. They were known as the Adams Infantry, and we'll show a muster roll from the unit. They were not the first Adams County unit to be organized during the war. That honor would go to Company E, 2nd Pennsylvania Infantry, which was made up of our local militia unit prior to the war, the Gettysburg Independent Blues. And actually, it was one of the first companies mustered into service by the state of Pennsylvania. That unit was a 90-day unit and would ultimately, most of them would ultimately become Company F of the 87th Pennsylvania Infantry. And of course, that unit was at the Battle of Winchester as part of the Gettysburg campaign. And you might know that Johnston H. Skelly Jr., Jenny Wade's boyfriend, was part of that unit. Altogether, there were some 3,000 men from Adams County that served in the American Civil War, including 800 men who were in the 165th Pennsylvania Drafted Militia at the time of the Battle of Gettysburg, stationed in Virginia. Company K was not a Gettysburg unit, although it was recruited and mustered into service in Gettysburg. It actually was an Adams County regiment. And there were men in the unit from Gettysburg, but there were looking down the roster, there were guys from Fairfield and York Springs and Bendersville, East Berlin, Center Mills, Heidlersburg, and there was even a few men from Emmitsburg in the unit. The original company commander was Edward McPherson, a United States congressman at the time from Gettysburg. And you might know that we have his presentation sword on display down in our Gettysburg Beyond the Battle Museum. One can only imagine this unit during the Gettysburg campaign. As they crossed the Potomac and began to march through Maryland as part of the Army of the Potomac, they must have become aware of the fact that the Southern Army passed through Adams County. And of course, on June 26, there was a little skirmish outside of the town that made the northern newspapers. On July 1st, the men marched from Union Mills to Hanover, Pennsylvania. And on that evening at Hanover, they got word that a battle had started near their hometown and in the middle of Adams County, and they began marching to get here. We can only imagine how much anxiety and dread the soldiers must have felt with knowing that a battle was occurring in and around the place where their families were residing at the time. There's a great quote in the Pittsburgh Daily Post on July 8, 1863, where they talk about the Pennsylvania reserves, and they mention that the guys from Gettysburg are in that particular unit. Defending the state of their nativity not only inspired the men with extra courage, but many lived in Gettysburg and about here. And with them, it was a fight in reality for their hearths and firesides. Over the heads of their helpless wives and children were passing murderous shells of the rebel invaders. At any moment, these shells might fall into their midst, carrying horror and death in their tracks. Is it to be wondered at that they showed no fear of the rebels, and that they drove the rebels from the hill and kept them at bay? The hill meaning a little round top. And I think that's part of our caught in the crossfire experience in the museum. So not only do we have families huddled in their cellar while the fighting is raging around them, but some of these people had relatives that were actually in the battle itself. Isaac Newton Doberl was a resident of Mountjoy Township, his family living on a road a few miles south of Bonneville. So on the late hours of July 1st, early morning hours of July 2nd, his unit would have passed through Bonneville a few miles from his house. Years later, he remembered, it was amusing as familiar scenes, persons and faces were presented to our view. Some young ladies whom I recognized as we passed along not far from my home and who were waving their handkerchiefs as soldiers passing by gazed at me in amazement as I called their names. And they did not recognize me, inquired one of another who that could be that knew them. Samuel Young of Mountjoy Township marched by the farm lane leading to his house with his family sitting on the fence, and his brother followed them to near Little Round Top before the fighting occurred. Henry Beamer, who was in Company K, lived just a short distance south of Big Round Top. And his uncle, John Wentz, owned a farm along the Emmitsburg Road near the Peach Orchard. William McGrew was a native from near Mummersburg and lived just north of Gettysburg. He was wounded in the fighting and died on July 26th. He is buried in the Soldiers National Cemetery, and he was the only member of the company to actually die in the Battle of Gettysburg, or die as a result. Calvin Hamilton was born along the Biglerville Road, just a couple miles north of the town. He was wounded on July 2nd, stayed behind in Gettysburg to recover, and he was one of those who was fortunate enough to meet Abraham Lincoln when he was here for the Gettysburg Address. James F. Culbertson enlisted in 1861, and during the charge into the wheat field on July 2nd, a bullet entered his head just behind his right ear, passed through his neck, and exited just below his left ear. He was carried to a temporary hospital where he lay insensible for 2 days. without medical attention and using the last bit of energy he could muster, he got to his feet and walked to his home at Middle Creek near Emmitsburg, 6 miles away. He actually survived his wounds and lived until 1917. And one of his most prized possessions for the rest of his life was the hat that he wore that day. The holes are plainly discernible, showing the entry and exit of the bullets. And of course, that hat is on display downstairs in our Gettysburg Beyond the Battle Museum. On the evening of July 3rd, following the battle, the commander of the company, Henry Minnig, whose own family lived in Gettysburg, allowed the men of the company to go home and visit their families that night, on the condition, of course, that they returned the next morning. At the Adams County Historical Society, we have an account left by Minnig that describes his harrowing experience as he tries to make it through the Confederate skirmish lines on the morning of July 4th to get to his family on Middle Street. Also in our archives is a collection of material concerning the formation of the Adams County Company K Memorial Committee. And we have a bunch of correspondence relating to the collection of monuments and contributions to the regiment. Arthur Weiner of the Adams County Historical Society and Dr. Charles Gladfelter did extensive research into the individual members of Company K that are listed on the monument. And here we have files pertaining to information on those families. So people today can come here, and this is available for researchers. I should mention that a large amount of descendants from members of Company K that participated in the monument dedication, and some of them were on the monument committee. And I'd like to point out that in my own collection, I have a brochure advertising the collecting of donations to go to the monuments, and I have the program. I attended the ceremony, I had the program from the monument dedication, and I have sort of a first day of issue from the ceremony that day. Just a couple more things about the monument. On the monument to the 1st Pennsylvania Reserves at the edge of the wheat field, there's a line that tells the fact that Company K was recruited in Gettysburg. And on the Pennsylvania monument on the battlefield, you can see the names of the men who were present for duty on the June 30th, 1863 muster roll. I should also mention that 2 notable people were in the crowd the day of the dedication of this monument. Ken Burns was here. He was in town to accept the Lincoln Prize at Gettysburg College for his PBS documentary, The Civil War, and he attended the ceremony. And of course, I also attended the ceremony. And as we said, Company K was not the only unit formed in Adams County during the Civil War, but they were the boys who fought at home. Remember, if you like the content that we put on our YouTube channel, please like and subscribe. Fear.